Hi, I'm Jean Segarra Navera from the National University of Singapore. In my article titled Metaphorizing Martial Law, Constitutional Authoritarianism in Marcos Rhetoric, 1972 to 1985, I ask a question that has boggled not a few scholars and political observers alike. Why do a lot of Filipinos believe that martial law is good for the Philippines? This, despite clear and considerable evidence of its failure during Ferdinand Marcos's authoritarian rule, its abuses, and its excesses that have had long-standing unfavorable impact on the national economy, politics, and society. I answer this question by examining selected speeches and publications attributed to the dictator Ferdinand Marcos from 1972, the year he implemented martial law, to 1985, his last full year in public office. In my paper, I argue that dictator Ferdinand Marcos rendered martial law as something palatable and appealing to the public mind through the metaphors that he employed in his speeches and ghost-written publications. The way he metaphorically expressed martial law in his rhetoric suggested that martial law was both a means to restore and to change society. He also cast his authoritarian persona as democratic and one that is indispensable to the transformation of Philippine society. The combination of these metaphors in his rhetoric suggests a schema or a core narrative that renders constitutional authoritarianism as central to national life. This core narrative had been mobilized throughout Marcos's presidency and has become so embedded in Philippine political discourse that even presidencies after him have invoked it. Now, to surface these metaphors and the core story constituted by these metaphors, I use a framework that I call schema theoretic perspective. The schema is a mental model that mediates between linguistic expression and the sociopolitical context. It undergirds what we communicate in political talk and text, like speeches, and at the same time organizes the evolving sociopolitical reality that we perceive. Essentially, I establish the link between text and context as mediated by the schema or core narrative. The insights that I put forth in my paper support ideas in existing literature that Marcos communicated martial law in such a way to discredit the Philippine left, suggest an alternative to Western liberal democracy, and to assert his legitimacy as a national leader. I add to this conversation with the idea that how martial law was communicated may have contributed to its enduring seductive power. If we do not contest and critically examine this enduring rhetoric, it remains subject to resurgence and recontextualization in our contemporary political discourse. The rhetorical nature of the Marcosian constitutional authoritarianism has had a life of its own, because constitutional authoritarianism has been written about, rationalized, and communicated to the public. It has spawned a perspective that people who have received, consumed, understood it, albeit uncritically, would still consider as a possibility or a promise that has not been fully fulfilled. That rhetoric takes a life of its own means that it mystifies, it obfuscates, it rationalizes, it simplifies, it idealizes, and it erases. It does things to recreate reality for us, and not necessarily to separate us from reality. It makes us see reality in a different way, in a way that is acceptable and palatable and bearable. Yes, it gives us an illusion, but that illusion is not without basis. It is an illusion grounded on selected and selective experience. That is why it becomes real to a certain extent. It offers us a myth, and this myth tends to be enduring and formidable and strong. The myth which I refer to in the article as the schema sustains our version of truth, and that version of truth, if not countered or critically examined, becomes the dominant truth that shapes how we do things, how we carry out politics, how we relate with others, and how we see ourselves. I hope you find time to read my article in Philippine Studies.